Κύριε Πρίτανη, κυρίες και κύριοι, αγαπητοί φίλοι του Βύρωνα, συνηθίζονται αυτές οι παρουσιάσεις να γίνονται στα ελληνικά, αλλά επειδή ο προσκεκλημένος μας ζήτησε θερμά να μιλήσω στα αγγλικά και κατ' εξαίρεξη θα κάνω την παρουσίαση στα αγγλικά. Distinguished Professor Jerome McGann belongs to that rare category of scholar who not only serves but leaves an indelible mark on the disciplines in which he works, and like good poetry, has the capacity both to instruct and entertain. I came across his work relatively recently when, in trying to grapple with the ethics of the Byronic hero, by no means an easy task, I read Dr. McGann's essay on the influences on Byron of Milton in Byron and Romanticism. This essay contained such perceptive insights and drew such interesting parallels between the two poets that I felt I had acquired an expert's grasp of the subject without having to read anything else. Now, you could say that this only gave me the illusion of mastery, but that is the whole point. Our feeling of knowledge is always at least partly illusory, and literary criticism is itself an art form, a rhetorical exercise not so different from poetry or creative writing. However, as Professor McGann has spent the last few decades demonstrating, both in theory and in practice, the subjective nature of the humanities shouldn't mean that those who work in the ivory tower of academia shouldn't try to ground them as much as possible in historical and material realities. But let us begin at the beginning, as Gertrude Stein would say. Dr. McGann graduated from Lemoyne College in 1959. He obtained his master's degree from Syracuse University in 1962 and his PhD from Yale in 1966. That means he's been a doctor for as long as I've been alive. During an academic career spanning over 4 decades, he has taught, amongst others, at the University of Chicago, Johns Hopkins University, California Institute of Technology, University of Virginia, and my very own alma mater, Royal Holloway College, London. No doubt those most qualified to present Dr. McGann's educational credentials are the countless undergraduate and postgraduate students that he has inspired all that time in all these universities. We could say that Professor McGann's academic work falls broadly into 3 main areas. Firstly, his work on 19th century Anglophone literature and culture with emphasis on the Romantics, especially Byron. Secondly, his work on critical theory with emphasis on cultural approaches, especially new historicism. And thirdly, his pioneering work on the use of new technologies in the arts and humanities. Generally speaking, Dr. McGann is interested in all things literary, cultural, theoretical, editorial, educational, and of late technological, and that doesn't leave much out. He has written widely on influence, textuality, teaching and reading practices, aesthetics, electronic and textual scholarship, poetics, research theory and practice, romanticism, modern culture, criticism, literary reception. In the case of most academics, it would be a rhetorical hyperbole to say the list is endless, but not in Professor McGann's case. It's safe to say that Dr. McGann has revolutionized every field he has worked in. This is especially true of the fields of computer-assisted research and Byron studies, where he has successfully argued against the dominant biographical psychoanalytic paradigm and in favor of historicist, materialist readings of the great Phil Helene's work. As a result, his call to historicize Byron has paved the way for something of a revival in recent years of that wonderful phenomenon called Byron mania, at least in academia, as well as an increased interest in the field of Romantic studies in general. Besides being on the editorial board of scores of cutting-edge peer-reviewed journals, such as the Byron Journal, Modern Linguistic Quarterly, Studies in English Literature, Critical Inquiry, etc., Professor McGann's many distinctions include membership of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Melville Cain Award from the American Poetry Society, 2 Distinguished Scholar Awards from the Keats Shelley and Byron Associations of America, and the Wilbur Cross Medal from Yale University Graduate School. In 2002, he was the recipient of 3 major awards. First, the Richard W. Lyman Award for Distinguished Contributions to Humanities Computing. Second, the James Russell Lowell Award from the Modern Language Association of America for his book Radiant Textuality as the most distinguished scholarly book of the year. And thirdly, the Mellon Foundation Distinguished Achievement Award. In 1996, the University of Chicago awarded him an honorary doctorate of humane letters. He has been a Fulbright Fellow, an American Philosophical Society Fellow, and a Guggenheim Fellow. He has also held more than a dozen other prestigious appointments, which include President of the Society for Textual Scholarship, President of the Society for Critical Exchange, co-founder of the Institute for Advanced Technology in the Humanities, and founder-director of ARP, both at the University of Virginia. But perhaps his proudest achievement to date is his founding and co-directing of NINES, or Networked Infrastructure for 19th Century Electronic Scholarship, from 2003 to 2008. This state-of-the-art electronic database, encoded for structured research and analysis, currently provides students and scholars of Dante Gabriel Rossetti with access to all the poet's pictorial and textual works and to a large contextual corpus of materials, most drawn from the Victorian period, but also stretching back to the 14th century sources of Rossetti's Italian translations. Besides his 2 award-winning books, Swinburne, An Experiment in Criticism, and Literary Studies After the World Wide Web, it is difficult to single out especially meritorious titles from Dr. McGann's 40 or so monographs to date. One could perhaps begin with the first major work, Fiery Dust, which contributed to the revival of serious interest in Byron's poetry back in 1968. Then there is his 7-volume annotated edition of Byron's complete works in the Oxford English Title series, which has become the standard edition of Byron's work. 1983 saw the publication of 2 of Dr. McGann's most influential works. The first, The Romantic Ideology, a Critical Investigation, argued that Romantic studies were afflicted by an uncritical reproduction of Romanticism's own self-representations and called for a radically revised reading of the field. And the second, A Critique of Modern Textual Criticism, has established itself since as the authoritative guide to the contemporary editing of literary texts. No mean feat, you will agree. Then there are, of course, Professor McGann's own poetry compilations, including Earhart's Sermons and 4 Last Poems, publications which are rare for an academic scholar, given the degree of self-revelation necessary for good verse. His most recent publication, Are the Humanities Inconsequent? A Reading of Marx's Riddle of the Dog, published in 2009, examines the crisis in the modern culture of reading using the author's favorite patacriticism, or the critical practice based on the study of exceptions. And if you don't know Marx's riddle of the dog, it's this, and I quote, "Outside of the dog, a book is a man's best friend. Inside of a dog, it's too dark to read." And with that as food for thought, I give you distinguished Professor Jerome McGann.